The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew.
Glory to you, O Lord.
After the Sabbath, at the first day of the week was dawning, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary came to see the tomb. And behold, there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord descended from heaven, approached, rolled back the stone, and sat upon it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothing was white as snow. The guards were shaken with fear of him, and became like dead men. Then the angel said to the women in reply, "Do not be afraid. I know that you are seeking Jesus the crucified. He is not here, for he has been raised, just as he said. Come and see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples, he has been raised from the dead, and he is going before you to Galilee. There you will see him. Behold, I have told you." Then they went quickly from the tomb, fearful yet overjoyed, and ran to announce this to his disciples. And behold, Jesus met them on their way and greeted them. They approached, embraced his feet, and did him homage. Then Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid. Go, tell my brothers to go to Galilee, and there they will see me." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
What is the one command that Jesus most frequently gives to us in the Gospels? You know, we always talk about the Great Commandment, or we talk about Jesus' new commandment. But if we actually read and listen to the Gospels, what Jesus commands more often than not is, do not fear. Do not be afraid. It seems Jesus knows us very well. He knew his disciples very well. And he knew that the thing that blocks us the most from hearing him, from letting him come to us, is fear. Now, that fear, as we see it in the Gospels, can take several forms. It could be fear of something terrible about to happen. For example, the disciples were in the boat on the Sea of Galilee, and a great storm comes up, and Jesus was not there with them. But he comes to them walking on the water, just as it seemed like the boat was going to capsize and they would all die. And what does he say to them? Do not be afraid. Fear not. Or it could be fear induced by something strange and wonderful. When the angel appeared to Mary, and it was clear that God was revealing himself to her, what is the first thing he says? Do not be afraid. Do not be afraid, Mary. And time after time, throughout the story of Jesus in the Gospels, we hear Jesus assuring his followers, do not fear. Do not be afraid. Now, our own experience is that we look around us and we find a great deal to fear. In so many ways, our world seems to be falling apart around us. Sometimes the events of our own lives are falling apart. Sometimes there's reason, great reason for that fear. And yet, the consequences of fear are so often hatred, violence, walling ourselves off from others in a kind of me-first self-protection. And we experience the other kind of fear also. There's very few people who actually get up and do anything before others who don't experience stage fright. And yet that stage fright, in the act of overcoming it, releases tremendous power and energy that without the stage fright, most performers will say, if you don't have stage fright, watch out. That's when you're going to trip over yourself and break a leg. So, fear that is overcome can produce great good. Now, Jesus therefore says, fear not, because I am with you. I mentioned at the beginning that today when we gather, we are not celebrating the event of the resurrection as if it was something that you could capture on a video camera, take out your iPhone and get a selfie with Jesus as he is rising from the dead. And movie makers have tried, always unsuccessfully, to in some way capture on film the moment of Jesus' return to life, the moment of his resurrection. I say always unsuccessfully because that is an unimaginable event. The Gospels do not record, and notice this, if you read the Gospels, they do not record the resurrection of Jesus. They record the empty tomb. They record the discovery of the empty tomb. And then they record the appearances of the risen Jesus. And so what we are celebrating is the risen Jesus and his continued presence with us. Now, one thing that is kind of interesting for us to realize in the telling of the discovery of the empty tomb and the appearances of the risen Jesus, we find that command repeated twice. Did you notice it in our gospel this morning? First, when the disciples go to the tomb on the morning of the first day of the week, Easter Sunday morning, they discover the stone rolled away and there was an angel. And they were frightened. And the angel says, "Do not be afraid." That's the first time we hear it in our gospel this morning. Then he tells them, remember that Jesus told you to return to Galilee. Go back from Jerusalem up to Galilee. Go back to where it all began. Go back to the beginning. And he will see you there. But it doesn't quite happen that way. Because as they are returning to in fear and in joy to announce this good news of the risen Jesus to the rest of the disciples, Jesus appears to them. And for the second time we hear, do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. I will go before you. Jesus will go before you to Galilee. Jesus will go before you as you go back into your own origins, your own past, your own history. Psychologists tell us that the way that we can overcome the fear that blocks us in our life and creates negative, problematic behavior in our life, the way to overcome that is by going back to discover the source of it. Going back and discover that in the source of what we fear, we will find the healing presence of Jesus. And then we can return renewed and return empowered to address not only our own fears, but the fears of others as well. That's how the disciples of Jesus were empowered to transform the world, by hearing and taking to heart that command of Jesus, fear not, and returning to the origins, discovering the source of their hesitancy, of their doubt, discovering the source of their fears, and then coming out and proclaiming Jesus to the world, and thereby transforming the world. Guess what? That gives you and me the pattern that if we begin to follow that in our own lives, listening to Jesus saying, do not fear, go back and rediscover our origins, we too will have the power to transform our world. And our world is so in need of transformation, isn't it? Okay? So today, when we celebrate the presence of the risen Jesus, guess what? We've got our marching orders. Go forth from here, transformed, freed of fear, because the risen Jesus is going before you, is with you. Now, in returning to our origins, in a moment we are going to renew our baptismal promises, because it's in the sacrament of baptism that we first experience Jesus transforming our lives. We are buried with him, and we rise with him to this new life. When we renew our baptismal promises, we will then be sprinkled with holy water. Don't flinch from it, because that is the water of rebirth, the water of regeneration.